Okay, for this lecture today, I want to talk about a topic in the 1920s that I hope you've been reading about. It's in Module 8, Lesson 4, where it's going to talk about women in the 1920s. I've kind of called this flappers and gender equality in the 20s. I'm going to scroll down, and there's a document set here that normally we would look at in class and we would analyze these and discuss them, but I'm just going to talk through them in a quick lecture, hopefully keeping this under 10 minutes. Women in the 1920s are going to have a decade of more freedom, of more independence, and kind of breaking out of traditional societal norms. If you remember from the Progressive era, women had become and had been actively getting more involved in politics and agitating for the right to vote and other social causes. In 1920, for the first time, women were able to vote in the presidential elections. And so you might ask yourself, okay, if women are beginning to have political equality, well, what's next? And the 1920s really shows women kind of demanding and taking social equality more seriously. This first political cartoon here shows this woman kind of clutching her chest and looking despairing because she's chained to this ball and chain labeled unwanted babies. Just for a point of view, this is published by Smith College, which is an all-female college, and it's in a magazine called Birth Control Review. So this is going to be a pro-woman cartoon, and what it's not saying is women don't want babies or they see babies negatively. What this is saying is that there is this standard in American society that says women must be tied down by children, whereas men don't necessarily have to be chained down by fatherhood. This is kind of portraying motherhood as an enslaving occupation, whereas fatherhood would not necessarily be that. So, for example, if a man in the 1920s had an unwanted pregnancy, that is something that a man could essentially move on from. And I'm not saying that that is a good thing to be an absentee father, but I'm just saying that many men did that in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In fact, the president of the United States in the 1920s, Warren Harding, had actually had a child out of wedlock and kept it a secret and went on to have a very successful business and political career. On the other hand, if a woman in the 1920s had a child out of wedlock or anything like that, she would have been shamed and branded as all kinds of negative things. The point being that men had more sexual freedom and opportunities after having kids than women did. In the 1920s, this is called a double standard. If you look at the title of these documents, it's called 1920s Men and the Double Standard. And that's really, in terms of social equality, what women were fighting against is one set of societal norms for men and a different set of societal norms for women. And this is a conflict or a discussion or a debate that is still raging today, maybe not necessarily in terms of birth control or parenting, but in many avenues of society, we still encounter double standards, and women are fighting for social equality against those double standards. This document is maybe the most thought-provoking. It talks about women traditionally being caretakers of the home. And in the old days, in the days of knitting, churning, pickling, curing, preserving, that was seen that taking care of the woman was very hard work, and it was actually seen in some ways as just as equal to whatever work her male counterpart was doing out in the field or the farm or whatever. However, it talks about the industrial decay of the home, and it's saying now men are going outside the home and are working and earning money. Women are staying in the home, but now they don't do any of this. Weaving, knitting, churning, pickling. Food is store-bought. clothes are store-bought. And what's becoming is that women are becoming economically dependent on their husbands. And this is not a good thing. And so yes, this is the point of view of a man, but what he's essentially advocating for is women to break out, to earn their own money, to work outside the home, and to not devalue the work that is done in the home. Here's another example of a double standard in the 1920s. Women smokers. Again, that's one of those things. Before the 1920s, men smoked all the time. A woman who smoked might have been looked down upon, and specifically because they were beginning to understand the effects of smoking on the unborn. So if a woman was pregnant, it was fine for her husband to smoke and for her to take in all of that secondhand smoke, but it was not okay, obviously, for her to smoke because of the effects on the unborn. And this document is just basically saying, women, you have to play by a different set of rules. Now, medically, obviously, you don't want women smoking when they're pregnant, but there is going to be a massive push among young women and working women and social women in the 1920s to drink more, to smoke more, and to essentially advocate for an equal standing in society as men had. And then finally, here's Margaret Sanger. And she's one name that you definitely want to know when you talk about women in the 1920s. She is the founder of Planned Parenthood. And the general answer to any Margaret Sanger question is she is an advocate for birth control. Now, we've already looked at, she's got some pretty radical ideas and very negative ideas about the poor and the outsider, foreign-born. So she's not somebody to emulate in all her views. But what she did advocate for was women's sexual freedom. She says a woman's physical satisfaction was more important than any marriage vow. Now that definitely undervalues marriage, but it does build up a woman's agency or a woman's say in control over her body, and changes a view of sex as something that is just a patriarchal, male-controlled institution to something that is more jointly owned and seen as equal. All right, those are the 4 documents that I have on here for you to read through and share that. I definitely encourage you to do that. If you look at any video in the 1920s, you're going to see what is referred to as a flapper, a woman who is on the go, generally with shorter hair. They called it bobbing your hair. This made it easier to style, easier to fix. You're going to see flashier forms of dress. You'll see the tassels and the glitter and different things like that. Women in the 20s were on the go, not the majority, but some, and essentially they were breaking out of the double standard and the social norms that said, hey, men get to play by one set of rules, but women have to play by a different set. The 1920s woman was saying that needs to change. Hopefully these articles give you something to think about and gives you an idea of some of the social battles that women were fighting in the 1920s. Thanks for listening.